The final notice was duct taped to my front door like some kind of ransom letter, big red letters, bold threats. A fake balance of $950 in unpaid dues. The kicker? I don't even live in the HOA. I stepped back, stared at the paper, and exhaled a sharp laugh. You've got to be kidding me. My name's Barrett Collins. I'm a paramedic. I work long shifts. I keep my lawn clean, and I mind my business. Bought my house 3 years ago, just outside the boundary of the Oak Glen Estates HOA. That boundary line is literally a cracked sidewalk that runs between my lot and theirs, and yet here we are. Red notices, threats of liens, and the queen of Oak Glen herself, Gretchen McAllister, standing at the edge of my driveway with her little clipboard and her even smaller dog. Barrett, she called out, voice dripping with fake sweetness. You must have seen the notice by now. You're 3 months behind. I walked over, holding the paper. Gretchen, I don't owe you anything. My house isn't part of your HOA. That's been confirmed by the county. Twice. She tilted her sunglasses down, giving me a look like I was some disobedient teenager. The board voted to annex your street. You're within the new boundary. You're a member whether you like it or not. Annex, I blinked. You can't just vote to swallow up properties. That's not how this works. She smiled, tight-lipped and smug. Well, it's how it's working now. That was the moment I knew she wasn't just posturing. She thought this was real, that her little club of lawn police had legal power to rewrite property lines. And worse, she was dead serious about enforcing it. Over the next week, I got more notices. One said I'd be fined daily if I didn't pay. Another said a lien was in process. And then came the cherry on top. A photocopied final warning taped to my mailbox with the words "immediate legal action" in all caps. I wasn't scared. I was furious. I pulled my deed. I printed the county zoning map. I highlighted the boundary line with a neon yellow marker. Then I drove to the courthouse and filed a preemptive injunction. 2 days later, a court date was set. Gretchen, of course, showed up in what can only be described as full HOA battle armor, pressed beige slacks, a floral blouse, and a binder so thick it needed its own zip code. She strutted up to the courthouse steps like she owned the place. You're wasting taxpayer dollars, Barrett. This'll be over in 5 minutes. I didn't even bother responding. I had a better plan. Inside the courtroom, the judge looked over the documents, squinted at the zoning map, and asked the simplest question possible. Mrs. McAllister, where in your bylaws does it state that you can annex additional properties without the owner's consent? Gretchen blinked. We had a board vote. That wasn't the question. She opened her binder, flipped pages, fumbled. Well, our board has authority to. The judge cut her off. No, it doesn't. Not beyond your legally defined boundary, and Mr. Collins' property is clearly outside of it. I turned to look at her. Her face had gone pale. The judge wasn't done. Furthermore, he said, you've issued fraudulent notices, threatened legal action without cause, and attempted to coerce payment under false pretenses. That's sanctionable. Gretchen's jaw dropped. Sanctionable, but he banged the gavel. You are hereby sanctioned for harassment and abuse of process. Any further attempts to collect from Mr. Collins will be considered contempt. I walked out of that room lighter than air, but I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Because I'd found something in her binder that day, something she didn't mean for anyone to see, and it reeked of fraud. I couldn't stop thinking about that binder, not the sanction, not the courtroom win. Those were just the opening act. It was what I saw tucked between 2 pages of budget proposals that stuck in my mind that night, half covered by a loose sheet she'd hurriedly flipped past. A spreadsheet printed in color with the heading New Acquisition Forecasts Expansion Phase Roman II. And underneath it, a list of addresses mine included highlighted in blue. What sent a chill up my spine was the column next to the addresses. It was labeled Projected Recovery, and beside my name it said $3,200. Not dues, not fines, recovery. I'd seen enough incident reports in my line of work to recognize when someone was hiding a paper trail. This wasn't about rule enforcement, it was about grabbing revenue. The next morning, I drove to the county registrar's office. I'd already confirmed my property wasn't in the HOA, but now I needed to know how close they'd gotten to making it look like it was. The clerk, a woman with a no-nonsense ponytail and a Rolodex of city maps, tapped at her keyboard for less than a minute before raising an eyebrow. "Interesting," she said, swiveling her screen toward me. There was an attempted filing 3 months ago to amend the HOA boundary lines. It was missing required owner consent forms, so it was rejected, but they submitted the map changes anyway. "Did they ever get approval?" I asked. She shook her head. "Didn't even get a hearing. They used an outdated annexation statute that was repealed 8 years ago." I leaned closer. "Is that public record?" She handed me a printed copy of the rejection notice. "It is now." That night, I installed a floodlight camera on the corner of my garage. I wasn't paranoid, I was prepared. Because if someone was dumb enough to fake an annexation, they might be desperate enough to make a mistake. Sure enough, 2 nights later, I caught a figure on camera creeping toward my mailbox with something in her hand. The video captured Gretchen clear as daylight, slipping a folded paper inside, then looking around like a raccoon in pearls. I downloaded the footage and made 2 copies, one for me. One for the sheriff's department. The paper she'd left wasn't even subtle. It was a reminder of imminent foreclosure proceedings on HOA letterhead, complete with a phony case number and a signature that looked suspiciously like it had been copied from a stamp. I drove straight to the county sheriff's station the next morning. Deputy Landers, a tall guy with a voice like gravel and the patience of a monk, watched the footage twice before leaning back in his chair. "That's criminal impersonation," he said, setting the paper on his desk. "And if this was mailed or distributed to anyone else, we're looking at mail fraud too." He opened a file and started taking notes. "We've been hearing grumblings about Oak Glen's board for a while now, nothing concrete until now. You willing to give a statement?" I nodded. "I brought copies of everything, and I'm not the only one they've tried to rope in." Landers looked up. "You know others." I pulled out a folder. 5 neighbors on my street got similar notices. They were scared, paid up just to avoid trouble." He frowned. "We'll need to talk to them." Within 72 hours, a formal investigation was opened. Subpoenas went out. The HOA office, a converted room inside Gretchen's house, was served a search warrant. And suddenly, people who used to avoid eye contact were knocking on my door with stories. One neighbor said he'd been fined for unauthorized fencing, even though his fence had been there since the 90s. Another showed me a letter demanding retroactive landscaping fees dating back 4 years before he even owned the property. But the real bombshell came from a retired real estate broker 2 doors down, Mr. Holloway. He'd lived in the neighborhood for over 2 decades, and he had the kind of memory that made librarians look sloppy. "They've been trying to stretch their authority for years," he told me, sitting on his porch with a thick binder in his lap. "But it got aggressive when Gretchen took over last year. She drafted a new budget with projected income from non-member homes. Claimed it was a transitional alignment, total fiction." He opened the binder and pointed to an email printout. "And here's where it gets dirty. This email was forwarded to me last month by accident. It's from their treasurer to a third-party collections agency." "Look at the attachment name." I leaned in. The file was labeled, "Pre-Lien Targets Non-Member Properties." He handed me a copy. "That's fraud, plain and simple." I sent the document to Deputy Landers. Within a week, the sheriff's department issued a formal statement. Oak Glen Estates HOA, under the leadership of Gretchen McAllister, was under criminal investigation for fraudulent debt collection, attempted mail fraud, and unauthorized representation of municipal authority. The fallout was instant. The treasurer resigned within 24 hours, 2 board members lawyered up, and Gretchen, she doubled down. She called a special emergency meeting at the community center and distributed flyers door to door urging homeowners to protect the HOA from an aggressive outsider trying to destroy our unity. I went, Not because I wanted to argue, but because I had something they hadn't seen yet. The place was full. Maybe 50 homeowners, packed into folding chairs, all murmuring with that tight-lipped anxiety you get when you think your property value's about to tank. Gretchen stood up front, flanked by what remained of her board, and launched into a speech about external threats, misinformation, and protecting our neighborhood traditions. I waited until she opened the floor, then raised my hand. "I have something to share," I said, walking up to the projector with a flash drive in hand. "It'll only take 3 minutes." She tried to object, but someone in the second row said, "Let him speak," and then others joined in. The room shifted. I plugged in the drive. The screen lit up. First, the video of her stuffing my mailbox. Gasps. Then, a scanned copy of the rejected annexation filing highlighted with the county stamp marked denied. Murmurs. Finally, the real kicker, a slide showing the email Mr. Holloway had given me with the subject line. Revenue forecast phase Roman II non-members. The room went dead quiet. I turned to the crowd. "I'm not the enemy. I'm your neighbor. I've been harassed, threatened, and lied to by this board." "And I'm not the only one." Gretchen stood frozen, her mouth slightly open as whispers rose like a wave behind her. A man in the back stood up. "Is this true? Did you fake annexation documents?" She didn't answer. Another voice. "You told us we needed the extra dues to cover rising costs." "But this says you targeted people outside the HOA." Still nothing. Then a woman near the front stood. "I want a motion to hold a recall vote, tonight." And just like that, the room turned, people raised hands, voices joined in. The momentum shifted like a tide breaking a seawall. I stepped back and let it happen. I didn't need to say another word. By the end of the night, Gretchen was voted out. The sheriff's department would handle the rest. But the neighborhood had spoken. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I saw porch lights turning on, people stepping outside, talking to each other, shaking hands. The HOA had tried to rewrite the rules. But they forgot one thing. We raid too. The morning after the recall vote, Oak Glen Estates looked like it had pulled back the curtain on a stage play and found rats chewing the props. Lawn signs that once read "Proud HOA Member" were quietly pulled up. The neighborhood's Facebook group, once tightly moderated by Gretchen's loyalists, had gone from curated garden photos to furious threads calling for transparency and audits. But I wasn't spending my time online. I had a meeting with the assistant district attorney. Deputy Landers had called the night before, asking if I'd be willing to turn over everything I'd collected to the DA's office. They were assembling a case. Not just for harassment or impersonation, but something more serious: financial misconduct tied to the HOA's collection practices. The assistant DA, a sharp-eyed woman named Yvonne Delaney, met me in a third-floor office that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight since the Reagan administration. She had already reviewed the documents I'd submitted, but she wanted clarification on a few things. "When did you first receive a notice referencing foreclosure proceedings?" she asked, flipping through a file with tabs colored like a box of crayons. "Exactly 5 days before the court hearing," I said, "and it included a fabricated docket number." I confirmed with the county clerk that it wasn't attached to any real case. She nodded, jotting something with a pen that looked like it had seen more indictments than birthdays. "And you're certain, absolutely certain, that the other residents on your street never signed consent forms for annexation?" I pulled out a typed page with 6 signatures, each line dated. Every one of them confirmed they never received, let alone signed, any annexation request. "This is a statement they all agreed to." Yvonne tapped the paper with the back of her pen. "This, combined with the rejected filing and the internal budget docs, suggests a pattern. They weren't just overreaching, they were manufacturing authority." She paused, her tone shifting. "There's also a second layer. We found payments routed through an unregistered third-party vendor account, no tax documentation, no disclosures to the HOA's bank. That's embezzlement." "I hadn't known that last part. Who was behind it?" I asked. She gave a tight glance toward the door before answering. We believe Gretchen and the former treasurer created a shell entity. It's listed as a landscaping subcontractor, but it's not registered in the state. We traced one of the account numbers back to a joint account registered under Gretchen's maiden name. I sat back, stunned. So they were laundering the fees through a fake vendor? Exactly, and using the HOA as the collection arm. That's racketeering if we can prove they coordinated it. I left the DA's office in a daze, the weight of what had been happening settling in heavier than I expected. This wasn't just about bogus dues or aggressive notices. They'd built an entire shadow structure under the HOA, and they'd done it with such casual arrogance they never expected a single homeowner to look too closely. But now the whole thing was unraveling. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Mr. Holloway. His voice was calm, but there was tension behind it. They've started shredding documents, he said. I walked past Gretchen's garage and heard the motor running. She's got boxes stacked up, and I saw the treasurer's wife carrying out more. I hung up and called Landers. He didn't miss a beat. We've got the warrant. We just needed probable cause to act. Thanks, Barrett. That evening, 2 unmarked cruisers rolled into Oak Glen, followed by a box truck and a team from the Financial Crimes Unit. They cordoned off Gretchen's property and began seizing everything: computers, file cabinets, even a safe hidden behind a false panel in the garage that, according to one officer, looked like it hadn't seen daylight since the early 2000s. Residents stood on sidewalks, arms folded, watching the operation unfold in real time. One woman whispered to her husband, "She always bragged about being efficient. Guess we know what that meant now." By nightfall, Gretchen was in custody. The treasurer turned himself in before sunrise. The charges made the local news within 24 hours. Wire fraud, racketeering, attempted mail fraud, and falsification of municipal records. The district attorney called it a disturbing abuse of community authority for personal gain. But even as the legal gears turned, the neighborhood was left with a vacuum. The HOA board was effectively dissolved. Without a functioning leadership, the community center sat empty. The landscapers stopped showing up. Trash bins weren't collected from the designated enclosure. For a few weeks, Oak Glen felt suspended in time. No rules, no enforcement, no structure, and people loved it. I saw neighbors helping one another repaint faded fences, mowing overgrown lawns that hadn't been touched in weeks. A group of teenagers even organized a weekend cleanup, hauling out old furniture and rusted tools from an abandoned shed near the tennis courts. One evening, I was sitting on my porch when a man I hadn't met before crossed the street toward me. He was tall, mid-40s, faded tattoo on his forearm, a former Marine, if I had to guess. "You Barrett?" he asked. "Yeah," he extended a hand. "Name's Troy, just moved in last month." "Heard you're the reason this place isn't under lock and key anymore." I shook his hand. "I just paid attention, that's all." Troy nodded toward the corner lot where the HOA shed used to be. "We're talking about forming a neighborhood cooperative. Voluntary, no dues, just people coordinating stuff when needed, no power trips." "That sounds like a massive improvement. We figure if you're willing, we'd like you to help set it up." I didn't answer right away. The idea of being part of any kind of leadership after what I'd witnessed made my stomach churn a little, but Troy must have sensed that. "No titles," he said quickly. "Just people keeping each other honest." I glanced down the street. Porch lights were on. Kids were playing in a driveway with chalk. The air felt lighter, like the neighborhood had finally exhaled. "I'll help," I said. "But only if we build it so nobody can ever abuse it the way they did," he grinned. "That's the plan." Over the next few weeks, something remarkable happened. The residents of Oak Glen began rewriting their story. Instead of top-down rules, they created a shared calendar for yard work help, bulk trash pickup, and safety patrols. A retired electrician offered free inspections for older homes. A nurse volunteered to run first aid workshops once a month. They even printed laminated cards listing everyone's emergency contacts and hung them inside the community bulletin board, which had previously only been used to post fines and warnings. There was still a long way to go. The legal case would drag on for months. Some residents were still waiting to recover dues paid under false pretenses. But the change was palpable. Gretchen's house was sold within 30 days of her arrest, repossessed by the bank after her assets were frozen. The new owners, a couple with 2 young kids and a dog that barked at its own shadow, moved in quietly and kept to themselves. No clipboards, no threats, just normal neighbors. One afternoon, I walked past the old community center and saw a hand-painted sign on the door. Welcome. No titles, no fines, just neighbors. Inside, a group of kids were setting up folding tables for a board game night. Someone had brought pizza. A man was tuning a guitar in the corner. I stood there for a moment, watching. It hadn't been about dues, it had been about control. And now the control was gone. All that was left was a neighborhood. Finally free to be one. 3 months passed. Oak Glen was quieter now. Not in the uneasy, rule-choked way it once was, but in the kind of way where people left porch lights on for each other without being told. The HOA was formally dissolved after a unanimous vote, more of a formality than a surprise, since all remaining board members had either resigned or been subpoenaed. The DA's office had built out the case faster than anyone expected. What started as a small claims-style scare tactic had unraveled into a full-blown financial crime investigation that swept through not just Gretchen's personal records, but the entire paper trail of the HOA's last fiscal year. And I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was listed as the primary complainant in what the state attorney eventually dubbed a deliberate and sustained effort to defraud non-member homeowners for personal enrichment. It had a case number, an assigned investigative team, and a courtroom date. By the time summer rolled in, subpoenas yielded over 50 pages of internal emails between Gretchen and her treasurer, Martin Ellis. The emails detailed the creation of the fake vendor account under a shell company called Green Sky Civic Services, which they used to funnel payments into an untraceable debit system. The county's forensic accountant found the routing number linked to a personal checking account in Nevada registered under a trust bearing Gretchen's middle name. The worst of it, they'd already spent most of it. Luxury hotel receipts, wine club memberships, a second home rental in Lake Tahoe. And in the most pathetic twist, monthly payments for a leased car Gretchen never even drove in town, presumably so no one asked questions. The court date was set for early July. It wasn't just criminal court anymore. A civil class action had sprung up from the residents who'd been coerced into paying fake fines, with over 30 plaintiffs represented by a local firm that specialized in HOA abuse cases. I met their lead attorney, a guy named Darius Kwon, at one of the preliminary hearings. He had a calm confidence, the kind you see in surgeons and chess masters. "You've rattled a hornet's nest," he said, reviewing the folder I handed him. "But for once, the hornets are actually going to jail." The courthouse was packed the day of the arraignment. Not because people wanted to see drama, though some probably did, but because for the first time in Oak Glen's history, people actually wanted to know how the rules worked, how power had been twisted, and who had let it happen. Gretchen entered in a navy blazer, flanked by a defense attorney who looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. Martin followed behind, head down, his cuffs barely visible beneath his suit sleeves. They didn't make eye contact with anyone. The prosecution laid it out cleanly. A pattern of fabricating HOA authority, falsifying legal notices, and laundering funds through a fictitious contractor. They even had a recorded phone call between Martin and a collections rep where Martin said, "They don't know they're not in the HOA. We just need to sound official enough." That call sealed it. The judge denied bail for Martin. Gretchen got house arrest with ankle monitoring until sentencing. I didn't celebrate, not right away, because there was still fallout. Some of the residents, especially the older ones who had paid the fake fines, had to be walked through the process of joining the civil suit. A few were embarrassed, feeling like they should have known better. I spent more time than I expected sitting at kitchen tables with them, helping them fill out affidavits and attach bank statements. It wasn't the sort of thing you plan for when you buy a house, but it felt like the right thing to do. One afternoon, I stopped by Miss Dolores's place. She was 82, had lived in Oak Glen since her husband retired from the Air Force, and had paid over $2,000 in compliance assessments that never existed. She handed me a check for $10 and insisted I take it. "For all the gas and paper," she said. I didn't. But I did accept the lemon bars she'd wrapped in wax paper. By August, the civil case reached settlement negotiations. Darius worked out a deal where every resident who had paid the fraudulent dues would receive full restitution, plus statutory damages. The funds would come from the seizure of Gretchen's assets, including the mysterious trust fund in Nevada and Martin's retirement account, which had been frozen by court order. It wasn't a fortune, but it was justice, and justice came in other forms too. The county council passed a new ordinance requiring all HOAs to submit annual compliance audits, including proof of boundary lines and signed consent forms for any annexation attempts. They named the bill after our case, Collins Residential Protection Act. I only found out when a council rep showed up at my door with a plaque and a handshake. I didn't put the plaque up. I tucked it into a drawer with old manuals and spare keys. But it meant something. Oak Glen's community cooperative kept growing. Without official titles or dues, it ran smoother than any HOA I'd seen. People volunteered for roles they actually wanted. A retired CPA handled budgeting. A middle school teacher coordinated block events. Even Troy, the ex-Marine, hosted a safety workshop on how to secure your home without making it feel like a fortress. And me? I went back to my regular shifts at the station. The calls didn't stop emergencies, never do, but they felt easier somehow. Like the weight of that one constant background injustice had finally lifted. One evening, I was sitting on my porch when Troy walked by with his dog. He paused at the edge of my lawn. "Barrett," he said, "we're thinking about putting in a community garden where the old HOA shed was. There's enough space and we figured it'd be useful." I nodded. "That'd be a good use of the land." He scratched the back of his neck. "You want a plot?" I thought about it, about the bitterness that place had held and how far it had come. "Yeah," I said. "I do." Later that month, I dug my hands into the soil where the shed used to stand, where files were once hidden and threats were printed. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange over the rows of tilled earth. Kids were running around with watering cans. Someone brought out a speaker playing jazz. It wasn't just about planting vegetables. It was about planting something honest. No signatures needed. No approval forms or committees. Just people side by side. Gretchen and Martin were both sentenced before the year ended. She got 6 years, with eligibility for parole at 3. Martin got 8, with no chance of early release. The judge cited deliberate abuse of trust and systematic coercion of vulnerable individuals in his closing statement. Their names were removed from every document tied to Oak Glen. Their clubhouse was gone, their rules erased. And yet the neighborhood endured, not because of the rules they left behind, but because of the people who stayed.